Good morning. I know everyone's taking time out of their middle of their day to come, so just want to get started. Good morning. Thank you all for coming today. My name is Andrew Gregg. I am one of the co-presidents of the New Canaan Country School Parents Association, along with Sarah Rayback, who's here. Today, we're excited to welcome New Canaan CARES and Dr. Raquel Harrison. Over the past 2 years, NCCS and the Parents Association have re-engaged with Maureen and Colleen really to re-engage our partnership with CARES. It had been a partnership in the past, and then bringing that back this year, we're recommitting our efforts to promote educational programming that truly resonates with our community and with the Darien, New Canaan, and surrounding communities as well. Thank you for everyone who's coming who's not a country school parent. Appreciate you coming as well. As I'm sure many of you are already aware, New Canaan CARES does a tremendous amount of work in the community for both parents and children alike, providing engaging and thoughtful programming and events throughout the year on a wide variety of topics. You'll see their information all over town all the time, and they do such great work. So we're very thankful for the partnership that we have re-engaged with you as well. In the fall, I met with Colleen and Maureen. Colleen, the executive director of New Canaan CARES, and Maureen, the education and program coordinator, to brainstorm topics for parent education programs like this that would be most helpful to parents and caregivers like us all. One topic that continued to come up in our discussions, as it usually does, is the fundamental importance of our children's overall physical and mental well-being. Like, that's the number one thing that we're always at the forefront for all of us is, how do I set my child up for success for that day, for that week, for that month, and for looking ahead for years and years. So with that, we are excited to welcome Dr. Harrison to speak about healthy habits for children and for parents as well. And welcome Maureen to kind of introduce Raquel as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Good morning. So I'm Maureen from New Canaan CARES, as you heard, and thank you for coming to Family Wellness Made Simple. Just to give you a brief understanding of CARES, for those of you that don't know, we are a nonprofit in town, and our mission is to empower youth, strengthen family, and build community. And we're also the local prevention council for New Canaan, which essentially means we do programming around drug and alcohol prevention. At CARES, we pride ourselves on responsive programming, and we couldn't do that without our partners. So thank you to Andrew, to the country school leadership team, and to the Parents Association. On to Raquel. We've been so fortunate, New Canaan is so fortunate to have resources and people such as Dr. Raquel Harrison. She's a double board certified physician in emergency medicine and lifestyle medicine, and she's also a resident of New Canaan for 14 years, 11 years, okay, and she's raising our children here. So her story is unique in that after being a emergency room physician for so many years, she saw the patients at the point of crisis, and she wasn't able to have conversations with them that she thought would benefit them to stop acute or prevent acute and chronic disease. So hence, lifestyle medicine certification was achieved, and her venture, Acute to Root, was born, and where she sees patients. She has an online course and does talks such as these. So we're so thankful to have her here today. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks, Maureen. And thank you to CARES for having me today, and to Andrew and the country school. It's a real pleasure to be here. My hat today is as physician, but if I take a step back, I have 3 girls. The oldest is in 5th grade. I have a 4th grader and a 2nd grader. They're in the New Canaan Public Schools. But ultimately, I hope you take away from today, too, that I am a mom. This stuff is hard, okay? And there's going to be a sense of, like, this is ideal. But ultimately, I want you to hopefully take away 2 or 3 things that you can implement in your life with your families, because this is about the health of your family, your kids, but also you and your partner or spouse or whomever else is in the home with you. And so please know that some of this stuff is the hope is to be practical. The hope is to also feel like I'm not coming at it from a place of perfection, okay? All right, so depression or anxiety, what's better, pills or exercise? Research shows us that exercise for 150 minutes a week is 1.5 times better than a lot of your common antidepressants. Journaling or pills? Journaling 3 good things every night before you go to bed for 15 days has a sustained effect that is greater than your common SSRIs. And so this is actually a study done at Duke, pretty interesting, from the perspective of what's that mentality or what's that place that you're setting up before you're falling asleep each night. Plant-forward diet or pills? Eating a plant-forward diet gives us the most access to tryptophan, which is an amino acid that kind of comes before serotonin. So that's our happy hormone. So kind of giving your brain a better chance to create those hormones and keep it in a better environment. Sunlight or pills? You guys get a theme here. So exposure to sunlight, that actually helps in that conversion from tryptophan to serotonin, and it gives you vitamin D. Vitamin D is kind of the vitamin that really is essential for our brain to make a lot of these hormones. As we kind of go through this, I hope you take away a few things, understanding of what lifestyle medicine is, and we're going to focus in on the hormone, specifically cortisol, as we kind of go through it, but also these practical tips and these practical ideas. I would love for anybody to jump up, ask questions at any point. Happy to kind of do that, okay? So what is lifestyle medicine? I'm going to toss out a question to the group. What is going on in this screen? What's your takeaway? What's on that kid? Sounds like a simple question, but there's purpose, I promise. Broken bone. What else? A cast. What is the cast doing? Is it healing? Inhibiting, okay. Supporting. Protecting. So the cast itself is creating an environment. It is not actually doing the healing. It is creating an environment for healing. That is what lifestyle medicine is. We are creating an environment so that the body can thrive, so it can flourish. It doesn't mean that all those pills aren't, in some situations, necessary. But are we optimizing the environment so that either those pills can get us somewhere and maybe not be dependent on them all our life, or are we just relying on the pills to do everything for us, right? And so ultimately, the bone is what is actually doing the healing, the cells within the bone, but the cast allows and provides an environment for that healing to take place. So that's lifestyle medicine. It's the evidence behind how lifestyle can impact, prevent, and reverse disease. There's a lot of focus on chronic conditions, diabetes, hypertension. It's probably where the most data is, particularly in terms of nutrition. But there's 6 pillars. These are them. We're going to walk through each one fairly quickly, but nutrition, sleep, exercise, stress reduction, avoiding risky behaviors, and social connection. So all these things come together, right? This is what creates our lifestyle. This is what kind of compiles that potential for not only us, but for our children as well. Now, to some extent, these 6 areas fall within an aspect of things we can control, or at least aspects of which we can control, right? There are certainly elements in this kind of framework of, well, what are the things that are uncontrollable? right? The uncontrollable pieces that may be part of our lifestyle and a very real piece of our ability to create a healthy environment in our home, right? Questions on that so far? No? Our kids are bags of hormones that are rapidly changing. This is an uncontrollable. Okay, we're all in this phase. For men, right? For the boys, there's some spikes of testosterone kind of early on as they are just being formed in the womb, but then we really get this spike in puberty and then a slow decline as men age. And so there's this kind of element of that steep rise, right, of testosterone, but ultimately there are a lot of changes hormonally going on for boys. For girls, it's a little more labile, right? For better or for worse, during puberty, we get these ups and downs, these spikes. These are uncontrollable, right? This is just part of how we are made. For boys, this is happening on a steady increase, steady-ish increase over years. For girls, this is cycling every month, right? These are uncontrollable pieces. It is important to recognize and how we support our kids. One of the things that's interesting, and I'm not going to dive too much into it, but estrogen itself has direct impacts on our brain's serotonin levels. And so, that perspective of quote-unquote moodiness, whatever you want to call it, there is a real hormonal piece behind that. Okay, and so to come at certain situations, if you do have 3 girls like I do, okay, to understand that this is going on in the background is critically important, right? That being said, we're going to focus on cortisol, and there's reason behind that today, but I want to kind of put that element of there are uncontrollable pieces in this for your kids, right? There are real kind of significant changes in their bodies, like internal milieu, right, that they're going through. Cortisol, if you look at this graph, this is cortisol over time, has approximately a 35% increase during puberty. Okay? I'm going to back up one here. If you look at the top, it says morning cortisol levels 1 hour after waking up. Here's the reason that's so important. So this is our daily rhythm. So if you think about it, boys are kind of steadily changing over time. Girls have this cyclic monthly piece. Everybody has a cyclic daily piece. This is where we can make the most impact and why I want to focus on cortisol. Any questions on that? So the graph before that shows the changing over time, this one in the background, that's just 1 hour after they wake up. That's kind of in medicine. If we want a one-time cortisol level, that's what we're checking. Okay, any questions on that? I'm just going to grab a quick sip of water. Yes. No, definitely. It will be available. Maureen and Andrew will send that up. So what is cortisol? It's our stress hormone. And that's what it's usually like dubbed as. It's kind of this piece of fight or flight and sends off a cascade of different ways for us to protect ourselves. In particular, it kind of provides us that ability to, if we need to stand up and fight, so our blood sugar goes up, we're kind of more alert, we're more heightened, we're ready to go, right? When that level comes down, that is our body relaxing. That's our other side of our nervous system. There can be an exhaustion to that. And so the question is how do we help our kids and ourselves have this nice, smooth cortisol rhythm all throughout our day? Ultimately, we're having ups and downs through the whole thing. Like if I could zoom in on this, it might look more like, it might look more like this kind of all throughout the day, right? Kind of an up and down, up and down, up and down. And so how do you kind of create that more steady piece? And so we're going to kind of go through all those pillars. Pillar one being stress, because it's our stress hormone, right? Even though this is really our life hormone, if you really think about it, stress is a critical piece here. So we can stack stress. That's what this graph is showing. If we don't come all the way down when we're stressed, we will just need to get ourselves back up again, right? And we will create a new baseline. And so one of the roles we can play as parents is, how do we help our kids kind of get all the way back down? And this is one of the tricky things about lifestyle medicine, is the fact that it's really personal. And so some of this is going to be what in these slides sticks out to you as something that would resonate with your kid, okay, or yourself, or your partner, or your spouse, right? And so that idea of how do we kind of come all the way back down and not stack, and again, this framework of, can we think about what we can control and not control? If it's something that we can't control, can we label it as such, or help our kids label it as such? I like this graph because it kind of captures this idea of a life without stress doesn't actually make us better. So not all stress is bad. Helping our kids see that is really important, right? We can live in this green zone of just, I'm relaxed all the time, but that doesn't actually push us to be better people. Use stress is the good stress. That's the stress that makes us better. It's the stress that says, I don't really know what I'm doing, or I don't really think I can do this, but my parent who's next to me can help me. My teacher who's next to me can help me. I know where the resources are so that I can grow. And then once you grow, the green area gets bigger. If we're too far out, if we're in a situation where we don't feel like we have readily accessible resources to help us through our stress, that's this distress piece, and if we live there too long, we're in burnout. And then we just start to totally disconnect from people, right, and don't want to access those resources. Any questions on that? So how does nutrition play a piece in this? We talked a little bit about having a plant-forward diet. One of the things that's just kind of interesting is so insulin, right, brings our blood sugar down when we eat. If we eat something that's too sugary, if we don't eat enough or are not eating, cortisol is what brings our blood sugar up. And so they kind of play back and forth with each other throughout the day. What's tricky about this is, let's say you have a cupcake. If you've ever been to one of my talks, I destroy cupcakes, so I'm sorry. It's just usually my easiest example. But if you eat a cupcake and have a big sugar load, what will happen is your insulin will spike, right, to try to bring that blood sugar down quickly. Often it will overshoot. And so you get this delayed rise of your cortisol to try to bring up your blood sugar again after it's overshot. Kids are particularly good at doing this because they haven't been doing it all their lives. Their bodies aren't fatigued. So what those processed sugary foods are doing is creating even wider range spikes of their blood sugar because their bodies are ready to go. And so this idea of, can you maximize nutrients, and that's the plant forward piece, right? Exercise. Exercise is a natural way of us boosting our cortisol. And so when we exercise, our cortisol goes up. When we stop exercising, our cortisol goes down. So it's a little bit of that, how do you train your body to be okay bringing that cortisol level back down? In the beginning slides, I mentioned the importance of exercise as potentially being more powerful than some of our antidepressants. I want to make a quick comment here because a lot of athletes experience a lot of pressures and a lot of stressors. And so I probably get that question most often of, what about those athletes who are really struggling? This is where the unstructured exercise piece comes in. That research and data is looking at unstructured exercise, not the exercise where your coach is screaming in your face or pressuring you. And that's a lot of what are the young people perceiving in terms of the exercise. A lot of people benefit tremendously from structured exercise, but there are a population who don't, and so that's really key to kind of hone in on. if that's your kid. What about sleep? So I apologize, looks a little busy, but it's not too busy. Cortisol is actually that black line. Okay, it kind of comes down throughout the day and rises during the evening. Melatonin is the blue. And so what happens is cortisol needs to be at its lowest point for your melatonin to rise nicely. And so you really need that come down to be able to create a good environment in your brain for sleep every night. Melatonin doesn't actually put us to sleep. It just is like the blanket our brain climbs into during the night to have a good environment for sleep. Social connection. This is probably my favorite one to talk about. I absolutely love kind of diving into this, and given if you have middle schoolers or early high school, the social media needs to be a part of this conversation. And so kind of briefly touch on that. McKinsey, if you're like really into research and love this stuff, McKinsey puts out really good data. They have a newsletter called Mind the Gap. It's all about Gen Z. So they put out really interesting stuff if you're interested. But I think the main thing to point out here is Gen Z really sees their health across the board as relatively poor, which is, obviously frustrating for someone like me. And in particular with social media, they're more impacted both positively and negatively, okay? And it's tied to the amount of time they spend on it. And so this piece of, well, where does social connection come in, or how can that help improve some of these markers? And again, tying it back to cortisol, right? Because that's our focus today, is really this idea of social connection improves connections in our brain. There's several different areas of our brain that are particularly impacted by the depth and quality and quantity of our social connections. Cortisol levels will actually come down when you're like in a good social context, and hugs. Maureen and I talk about this a lot. Giving your kid a hug when they are like, I just need my parent. That actually is really impacting their cortisol levels. Telling them they're loved. Interesting studies on 41% of Gen Z doesn't feel worthy of being loved. Those are really critical things for us that we think maybe we're communicating and taking for granted, where we can be more intentional and specific about. Any questions on this? Mm-hmm. So it's an interesting question. We're kind of on that border. I believe Gen Alpha starts at like 11 or 12 and lower. So it's kind of right in that border area. So middle school and high school are definitely Gen Z, but we're kind of in this turn. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. Risky substances dysregulate our cortisol. It just absolutely interrupts our rhythms. We see this with alcohol, we see it with marijuana, we see it with tobacco, I can go on. And so that's just really important to know. And the best, a lot of the research, there's a lot of research around prevention, which New Canaan CARES does a great job of putting to the forefront. But that piece of social connection can be really, really critical here from a prevention perspective. All right, so where's the practical piece? Because now you freaked me out because there's all this stuff, right? I want you to take a moment and think about your kid walking to your refrigerator. Why are they opening the refrigerator? Are they bored? Are they hungry? Are they just looking for something to do? Are they sad? Are they trying to be happy? There's a whole lot of reasons why we, as adults, open refrigerators, and there's a whole lot of reasons why kids open refrigerators. And the main piece I would tell you, as we've kind of been thinking about all of these things, is environment becomes really, really powerful, especially at the age group that we're at. And so you can help your kid think about the why. you also have the power to control what's inside the fridge right now. Right? And so that piece of, okay, how am I setting up environment? And do I ever verbalize why the environment is set up that way so that my kids can learn, so that when they're on their own, they have the ability to make those choices? All right, we're going to talk about a typical middle school schedule, right? Kind of looks fairly basic. Wake up, have some breakfast, go to class, lunch, recess, more class, come home. And then, if your young people are like my young people, every single day is different. And the reason that's tough is because it means their cortisol curves have potential to be impacted on a daily basis. In the public school system, this gets a lot better in high school. And I would say it probably is the case across all school systems, because they stay at school for their practices and then come home. Their stage just continues. Whereas middle school is different. We're running all over town. We're going all sorts of different places, right? And so what happens if you're not, or like what are the implications on this cortisol curve? This is that practical piece. How do things actually change if you can't help them stay on a good rhythm? If you either have a lack of a regular breakfast or delay breakfast, you are actually impacting the next day's cortisol curve. Your cortisol won't rise as high, and it potentially also pushes out the cortisol from its peak. Ideally, cortisol is peaking about an hour after you wake up. What's that? It impacts the next day. So the breakfast I have today impacts my cortisol's ability to rise well tomorrow. Okay? And so that idea of, well, I'm just not a breakfast person, or my kid's just not a breakfast person, and I know there's people in the room who are like that. Sometimes it doesn't necessarily need to be a big breakfast, but what you're doing is you're training your body to say, it's time to get moving, it's time to go. So that kind of, within an hour and a half of waking up, that's kind of the ideal time to have some breakfast. That's a good question. So the question was, does the quality of the breakfast or the type of breakfast matter? And, is something potentially sugary better than nothing, right? It's a good question. I like to advocate for breakfasts that are high in fiber and high in fat. Those are the most sustaining throughout the day. Will tend to be very plant forward or nut based, kind of in that realm of, and so I would try to encourage you to find a granola bar that kind of fits a little bit of that bill that she would enjoy having. That being said, the common conversation in our home is, you can eat that, but I also need you to eat this. So, well, I just want a piece of toast this morning. Well, that's great. It doesn't have a lot of stuff on it. How about some almond butter with it? Or something like a little bit of a give and take to balance it out. And sometimes that negotiation can help, and also is helping them think through it. So you can have the granola bar, but I need you to have a handful of nuts with it too. Late night exercise, because kids stay up till 9 o'clock playing sports in town. What is this actually doing? So remember, that cortisol needs to come all the way down for the melatonin to start to rise nicely. So it pushes back their bedtime. They're going to have a hard time falling asleep. You may see this in your own life. You may have seen this. This one I feel like is a little more intuitive for people, but this is kind of the science piece of it. Questions on that one? How about a late carbohydrate dinner? So this is tough. You made pasta. They have practice till 9. They eat a bunch of pasta before they go to bed. This is where, one is, can you make a choice where the type of pasta you're cooking is maybe higher in protein and fiber, so you're getting away from that purely carbohydrate-based type pasta? But the other piece, this is where you get that delayed cortisol rise. And so if your insulin overshoots because you have a high carb dinner, then your cortisol is going to course correct in the middle of the night. And you can get middle of the night waking, you can get early waking. We may be more sensitive to that as adults than our kids are, but you're training their bodies, right, in a certain sense, and this is that piece of that. Three hours is kind of that nice buffer. And that's why I wanted to come back to this. So thanks for prompting that. When you have, and you're trying to think through your kids' schedules, if you know they're going to have a late practice, sounds crazy, but dinner maybe right after school would make sense, right? And so it might be 4 o'clock because you don't want them to puke on the field, but that idea of let's get dinner in early, and then you can have a snack that's more protein-oriented when you get home from your sports can be really helpful to making sure these curves stay a little nicer looking. There's a lot of uncontrollables here, right? We don't necessarily determine the schedule that our kids' sports teams have, right? And so then we have to play with the things that are in our control, and that's that timing of dinner. We can play with that. All right, so here's this practical piece and kind of just a few highlighted summaries, but also please jump out. But again, think about maybe those 2-3 things that you can do at home that are a little bit different and can be helpful and make an impact for your family, right? A lot of the things I talk about, it's really about how do we shift trajectories rather than try to do a complete course correct, especially when we're talking about younger kids, right? Their bodies are incredibly resilient and have an amazing power to heal themselves. We have the ability, because they're still in our homes and still young enough, to control their environment a little bit more. And so stress reduction, that journaling piece, if you've got a worrier, one of my 3 is a big worrier, talking about these 3 good things at night just is a really powerful positive psychology idea and trick to kind of set their brain up for a more positive environment as they fall asleep and are trying to clear things and work things out while they sleep. Creating perspective, sense of awe, reminding them that yes, they are important, but then there's also a lot of other people around you, right? That can be extremely powerful, controllables and uncontrollables. And like I mentioned, nutrition-wise, eating as many plants as you can stomach. Kids' taste buds are different than ours. There's real science behind this. They have a lot more taste buds than we do, and they experience bitterness a lot more powerfully than we do. And so when your kids are absolutely disgusted by their vegetables, that is real, okay? There is real science to that. You can help them navigate that in a lot of different ways. I like to say carrots with ranch is better than no carrots. Okay, it's not ideal, but again, it's that idea of how do you just kind of get them thinking more about why should this be a regular part of my diet and life. Environment at home, we talked about timing of meals, fuel versus indulgence. I think you can start this as early as preschool. Kids get it. Is this food that makes my body go, or is this something I'm enjoying right now? there is nothing wrong with indulging in the sense of, can you work on one of those other pillars too? So we try to encourage indulgence around social connection. And I actually point that out. We're having ice cream all together tonight, right? It's that idea of these things aren't necessarily bad, but what else are we doing for ourselves by enjoying them? Exercise and movement, we talked about that structured and unstructured piece. This is a great place to get that vitamin D, get outside and do your exercise that way. Sleep in the elementary, middle school age bracket, 9 to 10 hours is ideal. That's what the science says. It's hard to do. They will accrue some sleep debt and recover that some on the weekends, but this age group also tends to be like really, that rhythm is still really real, right? You can go to bed at 10 o'clock and they are still up at 6 a.m. Quality of your sleep. You're thinking about blue light, getting your kids off screens a couple hours before bed is ideal. That exercise piece, the late night eating. Social connection. If your kids are on social media, just getting them to think about and talk about, are they an active user or are they a passive user? Or so are they just consuming things, or are they actually trying to create and obviously in a safe way with them, but if they have access to those things. Ideally, I'm on the camp of like less access, better, but and then lots of hugs family-wise is always good. Avoiding risky behaviors as your kids get older, helping them have a framework for when I do feel the need to escape, what should I do? If you can start thinking about that conversation, the younger kids are, the more resources and tools you'll give them as they get older so that substances don't feel like an easy option, right? Or like a necessary option. People talk about SMART goals a lot. I like to just put it in the context of you can make all the SMART goals you want, but how do you actually get it done? So try to ace it. So think about who's keeping you accountable, where are your controllables, and what does your environment look like? And then I'm happy to take some questions. These are just some resources that I also just like, some books, some podcasts, and yeah, that's it. I can put that back up if you... Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I don't know if you guys heard that, keeping fresh food containers in a cooler in the car. It's powerful. It's great. Yeah. 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 They do change their mind often. It is, so I've been an emergency physician for 15 years, and I had a conversation with my girls about 2 weeks ago and said, the hardest thing I've ever done is make dinner for the three of you. So it is real. It is super real. A friend just turned me on to the idea of using AI to create meal plans, like ChatGPT, and tossing in, this is what my kid likes, doesn't like, and I need a meal plan for the week. I tried it this week. I mean, it's kind of an interesting idea. So it's hard in terms of resources. There's a lot out there that you can get. I would try to stick in like something that's plant forward at least, or clean. I also will tend to, if my kids are willing to eat a vegetable, I will give it to them until they tell me they will not eat it anymore. And it's a little bit of just leaning into that space of, I'm going to take advantage of the fact that you're willing to eat cucumbers this week, and I'm just going to give you as many as I possibly can. But it's hard. Yeah. Yeah, so melatonin supplements for kids was the question. Generally speaking, melatonin is safe. And we mostly take it incorrectly. I mean, I can pull up that slide at some point and show you specifically, but melatonin will start to rise a couple hours before bed. And so what we typically do is we take it right before bed, and we take 5 milligrams or 10 milligrams even, when really we should be taking 1 milligram 2 or 3 hours before we want to go to bed. Does that make sense? And so smaller dose just earlier in the night. There was maybe about 2-3 years ago, they were finding a lot of extra additives and serotonin derivatives in the melatonin that was out there. And so you need to be a little bit more careful. USP is kind of the FDA equivalent for supplements, and so just making sure that that is on your supplement. For kids specifically, there's no data that suggests if they take melatonin as teenagers, they will somehow ruin their melatonin production in the future. But what I would challenge you to say is, what's the underlying reason for the need for the melatonin? And can we be doing other things first before going there, right? Is it they've got so much homework that they're on their computer until midnight? Or is it, and we need to pull that back or kind of restructure the day to accommodate that? Or are they exercising late? Or, so thinking through those pieces and other kind of sleep hygiene tips. And I'd happily send you kind of a list of sleep hygiene tips that I have. So making sure that that's a little bit of like last resort, I guess, is particularly for kids, right? Yeah, it's a good question. So some fruits and vegetables are impacted more by whether or not they're organic or not, partly if they have and this is from like the pesticide perspective, right? Is whether they have a shell that you don't eat. Avocados and bananas tend to be, it's less concerning potentially. From a nutrition perspective, organic is typically better. It'll just have a higher density of vitamins, minerals, nutrients. And so that's important. So that's a little bit of that piece. And so the question is you're paying more at the store, but are you actually getting anything? Typically you are. Typically you're getting a piece of fruit that has more nutrients in it. Now, is that, how across the board is that? And but if it's possible, I tend to recommend being in the organic space. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know a lot of like the data behind that. That added stress on their growing skeleton maybe is kind of like where my like gut would kind of ask questions. That being said, body weight type stuff where they're doing more of the, push-ups or or squats or things like that just without any extra weight, that's probably all within normal developmental skeletal stuff. I would probably, the piece of like the increased injuries, when we think about like even our gut health, if we eat a variety of plants, that fosters a better environment for our gut. So similarly, the way I would think about it is a variety of movements would foster a better atmosphere for our growing skeleton, right? And so that piece of specialization probably is leading to injuries, right? Because you are doing the same repetitive movements over and over again. But whether or not weightlifting would combat that, I don't know the data on that. If there's any other questions, I'm happy to stick around. And I'll put up, that's my email address, my website. Do have a newsletter. It's very practical. Here's the evidence. Here's the tip of what you can think about this week. And then I know CARES has some upcoming programs, so I'll let Maureen kind of speak into that.
Thank you so much. Learned a lot of good parenting. Just wanted to let everyone know we are having another program. This is a 2-part series this year that we're doing, which we're excited about, of our Empowered Parenting series. And it's on February 12th at 8:30 in the morning. And it's Navigating Mental Health Together with Rebecca Campbell. She is from Sasko River Center, and she's really talking about the difference between stress and anxiety. She is a psychologist. Knowing the warning signs, what's normal, what's not normal, where can you get help. So it's going to be a really great program, and you heard a little bit about that today. I think you touched on it. So we're trying to do both physical health and mental health so that, it's all for wellness in terms of care. So, and also, please take one of these because we have tons of programs this spring. We are packed, so we hope that you do come this spring. So thank you so much.